All right. So, Scott?
Yep. So I'm Scott Constable from Vesper Technologies. We're a system integrator. We've been running for about 3 years, working with OCP as a core part of what we do.
Hi. Hi, everybody. My name is Mariano Cunietti. I'm from Enter.it. We run a public cloud in Italy and with regions also in Germany and the Netherlands. We run OpenStack, and we run parts of our workloads on OCP gear, so since a couple of years.
Liz, do you have a mic? Is that mic working?
Hello? Yes,
Oh.
it does.
Liz is actually our moderator for this, just pretending to be one for a minute. Go ahead, Liz.
Thank you. So, yeah, I'm Liz Cruz from IHS Markit, which has kindly been mentioned a few times today. So we track OCP adoption among other data center technologies. And Aaron kindly invited me here to kind of facilitate a conversation around demystifying open technologies, the adoption of them in companies beyond hyperscale. So we've got a good representative panel here, as Aaron said, of operators and on the supply side. So Ami, if you want to pick up with your introductions, and then...
Sure. I'm Ami Badani. I lead marketing for a company called Cumulus Networks. We provide networking software for the modern data center.
Go ahead, Lasse.
I'm Lasse Jensen. I am a product owner at Booking.com. I work in the data center track. We're a small team of 40-plus people who are looking after the data center infrastructure, the server infrastructure, the network infrastructure that goes between the data centers and in the data centers. So that's me.
Okay, great. And as Aaron said, so I'm going to pose a few questions to get the conversation started, but please, we'll leave time at the end for any questions that you may have as well. So let's start with on the operator side to Lasse and Mariano. Can you each say, I know Mariano you kind of hit on, but where you are in the adoption of open technologies and where your organization fell on that spectrum to begin with, from safe to practical to visionary. Where were you? How did that change your adoption of open technologies, and how did that impact how you've moved forward?
I will. So we started in 2011 to research on how we could build our own cloud platform. The first choice, obviously, at that time, since we were a typical enterprise IT shop, so I have seen both faces as you did. And we went to VMware, and we went to the headquarters in Italy, and we asked to partner. And they basically told us, OK, this is the product list, and this is the price list. You can do whatever you want. So we decided that we wanted to be free to take control on our product, and we looked for alternatives. And at that time, the best one was OpenStack, that Aaron knows very well. And we decided to build not only the cloud orchestrator on open source technologies, but everything. So we built the storage on open source technology, of course the hypervisor, and also the networking system. So as of today, our stack is entirely open source. So we spent the last 6 years, 3 of them, the first half on the making disaster part of the visionary. Now we have moved to the practical, which is a good trade-off. So we moved to sleeping during weekends and nights, so we are pretty happy. So we have just moved from visionary to practical with some raids into the visionary again.
Yeah, for Booking's point of view, I guess on the software side, open source has always been something we've been very much involved in. Hardware, however, has been a bit more traditional, off the shelf, just make it work and move on. So not too much complication there. As we grow a lot, and we have a lot of demands as well on not only the growth, but the velocity and how we do things, and we understood that that growth trajectory would give us some challenges in terms of how we deliver our services. And a bit earlier today, there was shown a slide about, for example, disk sizes and how those grew, right? And the last number was 14 terabyte disk size. This is where we are right now. on some of our hardware, which means that there's nothing beyond there. There's just like we don't have a solution for the next bit, which is kind of some of the edges of where we are with our hardware right now. I would say that we are on that spectrum. We're not afraid anymore of looking into to open source hardware. We're practical. We very much look at it from a practical point of view. Does it make sense to do it? We know we can. We know we can use open source switches. We know we can actually make it work. It just has to make sense from a business point of view and from a scalability point of view. So our range of choices, if you will, has just gone bigger, and now it's up to us to choose the right type of hardware, the right type of approach, I would say.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, it's a continuum, and organizations are made up of personalities and people, and you can move back and forth. It's interesting. Okay. Yeah. So to Scott and Ami, kind of on the supplier side, the point of this presentation was to kind of normalize adoption of open technologies, to demystify it, and the reason that's necessary is because there is skepticism, right? So where do you find that most of your customers exhibit the most cynicism? What aspects of it have the most difficult time accepting? Scott, I know you talked earlier about how there's different pieces of the organization. Some will accept it, some won't. They're going to have to sell it internally. What are the biggest hurdles you're kind of finding there?
Yeah, we kind of always looking at trying to identify companies that are trying to look at going open source or open networking, white box servers. We're just looking around. So once you open up the door, you're looking then for the individuals, because you'll get a lot of pushback. But you'll always find one or two characters that are looking at you in a positive light, and you try and focus with them. And then as you build the relationship, you bring the value, you start bringing more success within that business about exploring that kind of technology. So the negative is generally a positive, because that means somebody's pushing back on you, and that means there's something to be discussed at least. And that's where we start generally.
Okay, interesting.
So I would say that we sort of, we have now about more than 1,000 customers, and I would say we hear sort of three main things from our customers. One is around supply chain. So once they get excited about moving to a more open model, it's, well, how do I procure the hardware? How do I procure the software? How do I procure the cables and optics? How do I assemble this and make it successful? So that's sort of one of the key things that we face, and one of the things that we've had to do to sort of mitigate that against that by providing sort of a more turnkey solution. I would say the second is around reliability. So to Aaron's point around uptime, is this going to be as reliable as what I've had previously? And we hear that a lot. I think one of the ways that the community is really mitigating against that is sort of joining forces and saying this is support, this is reliable, this is sort of the next frontier. As Aaron mentioned, open is inevitable. It's just a matter of time. And so providing sort of a level of support and reliability and kind of walking customers through that journey of how they can be successful with an open model is sort of another key point we hear. I would say the third thing is risk aversion. I think the biggest thing we hear, from companies is we can be safe. We can just do more of the same, do more of what we're used to, and sort of be in that safe bucket. And I think you sort of see these waves of companies shifting over time. Companies that were safe a couple years ago are now moving to a more practical model and realizing that that's sort of the shift forward, and it's not as scary as what it used to be, 3-4 years ago. It's actually, matured quite a bit over time as customers are out there, adopting open technologies more and more. It's been proven at scale more and more. I think people are being a lot more practical with the way that they're deploying and adopting these open technologies.
Okay, good. Thanks, Ami. Kind of staying on that same struggles note then, Mariano, can you talk a little about the biggest hurdle you experienced in your own organization, whether it's the technology or personality conflicts?
Well, the greatest struggle we face every day with every customer we meet, except not being AWS, which is a huge struggle for an Italian company, but mainly it's a cultural struggle. I mean, they are used to have the go-to supplier, the go-to provider. So they go to mommy like that. I mean, they bring every worry they have. But the open source approach, the collaborative communities approach is you are building basically your entire own processes in-house. You are designing it, and you are assigning like microservices to some components, the role of doing something, the storage, the software-defined storage, the hardware, the open compute hardware, etc. So the thing we face every day, it's hard for them to understand that they do have to go back to their goal, not to how do they do things. Like Amy said, is it reliable as the component I used before? No, it's you are building a new process. You are taking out the process and building with new tools, new components. So you have to be conscious of your process. So you have to understand your goals, and you have to redesign it. And then you can plug different components. So I'm not replacing something you already have. I'm doing something more. Okay, so it's a cultural shift. Maybe complex sometimes to understand and to accept and to start.
Okay, that's a significant one, yeah, and it's something kind of Aaron had hit on as well in the presentation, really focusing on the goals. Lasse, can you talk about what your one piece of advice would be to companies either beginning to consider this or maybe early on in the process?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's not magic. They're just computers. They run Intel CPUs and normal CPU, normal memory, and they're using hard disks and stuff like that. So if you can make a normal computer work, then you can also make this OCP type equipment work as well. I think it matters if you have a plan to start with, understand what it is that you're trying to do and trying to fix, what problem you're trying to solve, and develop some metrics that you can measure this on. Whether you're trying to measure the power consumptions or the temperature that you're generating, or the density you can do in the rack, or how fast you get stuff into your data center. There could be many metrics that are important for you, but talk about them first. I would say that's it, because then you have that sort of as a goalpost in mind the whole time as you go through that process. There are many companies out there or suppliers out there that also offer half-rack solutions. So if you just want to kick the tires, certainly go out and try and do that. And go, as I think as Aaron said, go out and see it, have a look at it, look and feel. There's also a lot of opportunities here. And then put a couple of engineers in a room and just look at it, because then that demystifies the whole thing into, oh yeah, this is just servers actually. What are we talking about? So I think that is one of the advice I would give. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of dip your toe in the water.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Don't be afraid.
Absolutely. Okay, and then Scott, kind of on that same, continuing with the goals, and as Lasse just said, it's important to outline what you're looking for at the beginning, to have metrics. What are you gonna focus on? What are your customers coming to you saying, I have this problem, can it be solved? It may not necessarily be, I'm coming to you looking for OCP solutions. It may just be, I have these problems. What are those, and what ones are you meeting with OCP solutions?
As I said, we do OCP, but I think we set sail with the kind of ambition that we could first find OCP opportunities and we could sell to big players, but we realized that it doesn't just happen overnight, and that's taken some time for us to get to that stage, as in the way that you talked about trying to get there. It just takes time as a business to realize that we have to go out and just win little battles. And when we win a little battle, it might be on the network, it might be the storage, it might be the white box server, but as soon as we plant a seed, it just starts a conversation. So network, for example, is always a good one, because you talk about not big investment. You can easily get together a 2-leaf get together a 4-leaf 2-spine, and we can give you that kit to play with, and then we can give you Cumulus to play with, and we can give you some people to support you to do that. So we've recently gone through this scenario where they were using Cisco, over 1,000 switches. In the room, there was 3 people. One of them was nodding his head a lot. The other 2 were quite set in stone. They were Cisco, and over a month and a half, all three of them are now excited about what they're going to deploy into their business. You know, we change their mentality. And I think sometimes people just get hard locked into what they do on a day-to-day basis. And as a system integrator and what I've learned, it's about helping people make this transition. Because, like you say, it's not rocket science. It's everything they know. It's just doing it a little bit differently. And actually what they get back from it is just more joy from it, which sounds a bit weird, but it is. It becomes excitable. Everyone's buzzing about what they can actually do with the technology instead of just deploying it and putting it to bed.
I like that. Okay. Amit, did you have anything to add in terms of what problems you're seeing from Cumulus's perspective?
Yeah, I think the number one goal that we hear from our customers is they want a more simple, agile, flexible infrastructure to run their applications. So you sort of look at the journey over time from mainframes where it used to be sort of simple applications with complex infrastructure to client server, which was like complex applications, complex infrastructure. And then you're sort of shifting back to complex applications, lots of data traffic passing through these applications, and you need sort of a standardized, simple infrastructure that's more agile. So that's sort of the things that we hear most about is I'm building a private cloud with lots of applications that are going to be complex, lots of data passing through. How can I have a simple, open, more agile infrastructure to support these complex applications? So I think that's where sort of the open model really comes in is how do you build an infrastructure that's a standardized set of building blocks that you can sort of scale out over time and that's more agile, flexible for the needs of the business. So that's one of the main goals we hear.
Okay, we hear agility a lot too in our research on OCP, and I think that goes along what you've been saying. Organizations change, applications change. You need technology that can change and grow with your organization. So I think we do have some time for questions. I don't know if there's anything else you guys want to add, or if I can. Aaron, was there anything you wanted to add?
No, this has been great.
Okay, great. So we can go ahead and open it up. 3 minutes. We have 3 minutes for questions. I think that's time for some really, really great interrogation.
I'm sure some of us have time afterwards, too. But please do stand up right away if you have something on your mind.
That's a broad no.
Yeah, this is the awkward phase where nobody wants to go first, right? Yeah.
Does anybody feel like their organization has always been visionary and you're ready to adopt? And does anyone feel they're on either extreme end of the spectrum? I want to be a great example. Okay.
I would also love to hear from any of you who are just deeply cynical about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be
There's a
fun.
question
Yeah.
right there.
Oh.
Right there.
You got to go in.
There are quite a lot of OCP products today, many different platforms. The main ones, the one from Facebook mainly, and Microsoft and Google seems to be doing something different. So there seems to be a lot of fragmentation. So as a potential user, how do I navigate those? I mean, it sounds more complicated than comparing boxes from different vendors, right? So how do you suggest as a potential user, how do we look at all these different designs?
Yeah, I just have one thing I want to say about that, and it's unfortunate it's not on the stage anymore, but there was at the keynote, there was a little rack of gear over here that was adapted, sleds that Facebook helped develop and contribute the specification for, developed by MyTac and shipped in a 19-inch rack. A lot of that was done independently, and I think for the opportunities that were there. And I think if you go kind of visit the store, as I was saying, and you survey the supply base, you'll find that a lot of these components that are out there are actually reused in some sense, and that you don't necessarily need to redeploy exactly like what you see in a Facebook or a Microsoft footprint. Like there are many other choices that you have in terms of your freedom to deploy. And I suspect Scott and others might have some feedback there on what they've done that might not be like just what you see in one of those booths and those racks.
We we're often, I think every time we come across something, it's everyone's got a different requirement, so we kind of having to build and configure the way they want to so that they feel familiar with it, and then we give them that hardware, let's say, for a time for them to experience it. And it's so quick once they get hold of it that the next thing comes and it kind of evolves. So we have a good reference where they actually didn't want to have true OCP kit. They just wanted to have something inspired by it. They've had it for maybe a month and a half, and now they've got to the point where they're saying, actually, we want true OCP now. This isn't what we want. We want the true OCP, and it's an interesting thing. It really is how fast people pick up on it once they dip their toe in the water, as people have said.
Thank you for the question. That was a good one. That's it. That's all we have time for. So thank you so much all for listening, and thank you guys so much for sharing your perspectives and for sharing your thoughts. It was a good presentation, and if anyone has questions afterwards, we'll all be standing around.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.